Hello and welcome to the West Flynn Show. Your host is Ulysses Flynn. Whenever I go onto the internet and see anything concerned with Brexit, it's instantly talked about as why it's one of the worst things ever and how the British are stupid, racist, etc. for voting leave. And I feel that's a very unfair view at best and an ignorant view at the worst. I believe it's due to how it's been explained in other countries besides the UK. So I want to use this video to explain some of the many benefits of leaving the EU. But before I start, I want to make clear to everyone, I supported Remain and still believe it would be best for the UK to stay in the EU. But nothing is black and white in the world, and to say the leaving the EU has no benefits is quite ridiculous. Well, let's start with a major point, border controls. With freedom of movement inside the EU, the UK has open borders with 27 other countries, and around 440 million other people. EU migration makes up 5% of the total population in the UK, with 3.2 million people. And in 2016, the annual net migration from the EU was 190,000 people in 1 year. That is a city of Exeter of people every year coming into the UK. This results in a mass of people that has the same access to the UK's welfare system and benefits, and has resulted on massive strains on the government in areas with high immigration like Peterborough. Now I can hear the comments being furiously typed now, saying that the British people won't do the jobs that immigrants do. And yeah, you're probably right. Some people won't do the jobs that immigrants do. However, the vast majority of people that are looking for a job are more than willing to take it if standards and conditions were even at a basic level. Immigrants are basically exploited with some businesses. Take for example the agriculture industry. Immigrants work much longer hours than they should, get paid very little compared to the average earnings in agriculture, and with some companies having immigrants living in dormitories to save on costs. This is all because these standards that people in the UK find abhorrent are better than the conditions and pay in many Eastern European countries. So leaving the EU will allow the UK to control its borders and decide on how many people it should allow in, and what skills should be allowed in if they use a points-based system, for example, like Australia. Another reason why it's good to leave is because the EU is very undemocratic, which is detestable for many that an organization that has power over the UK is inherently undemocratic. The two most powerful parts of the EU are the Commission and the Council of Ministers, sometimes called the Council of the European Union, not to be confused with the European Council and the Council of Europe. These are the only two parts of the EU that can propose legislation and can force legislation through on their own if they needed to. The problem is that no one in the EU directly votes for any member of these two organizations and have to follow out the legislation they create. Now, before I go any further, I believe it's best to talk about the European Parliament. The Parliament is the only elected institution in the EU. However, its role is more advisory more than legislative, as they can only propose amendments to legislation, and these amendments can be ignored by other institutions if they choose to do so. Since Maastricht and Lisbon, the Parliament has gained more powers, like being able to dismiss commissioners and co-decision on some areas with Council of Ministers. But these changes are relatively minor and have created very little power for Parliament. The undemocratic nature of the EU is another good reason to leave it. Another reason why leaving the EU is good is the cost of it. Yes, I know what you're thinking. You know that £350 million a week figure is wrong. And you are absolutely right. First off, the UK gets a bunch of money back from that figure with a rebate that Margaret Thatcher negotiated in the 80s. And secondly, a large chunk of that comes back in form of investment in the UK. However, even with that taken away, it is still £161 million a week spent on the EU. While this figure isn't the vote leave propagated figure, it's still a significant one that could help many parts of the country that need some more funding. So money saved is another reason why leaving the EU is a good thing. Another reason of coming out of the EU is that you would also be coming out of the common external barrier. By being a part of the common external barrier means that the UK has had to forsake having trade relations with many of its allies. and instead have to follow what the EU's trade relations are. This is because the UK can't independently make trade deals, and have to instead have trade deals with the countries the EU has deals with. Since the Leave vote, many countries have expressed a desire to make a trade deal with the UK, when it leaves the EU, of course, such as Australia, New Zealand, and the USA. Also, once outside the EU, the UK can make a trade deal with the EU itself, similar to CETA with Canada and TTIP with the USA. The UK would have access to the single market without being a part of the EU and having to endure the many downsides of membership. Now, these are just some of the major points. There are a wide array of other benefits of leaving, such as no longer under the jurisdiction of a foreign court with the European Court of Justice, no longer having to worry about the ideological threat of the EU to eventually federalize, and the UK would no longer have to participate in institutions that are weighed not in their advantage, such as the Common Agricultural Policy. Anyway, this has been the West Flint Show. Speak soon.